Hey everyone, I'm Ermysenigma. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Burotgor. Burotgor is the head of a Beastman clan, a feared group of monsters who raid villages and hoard huge amounts of gold and gems that never get spent, since the only hobby of beastmen is killing other beastmen. So I don't know what's the point of being in this clan if they're just gonna kill themselves off. Anyways, this monster is the latest and newest team race monster. He has a really great design in my opinion. Look at all those weapons, look at this monster, he just looks so cool. And anyhow, as of the time recording this analysis, there's a total of 33 Earth Legendary Monsters. And also take note that the Nemesis Monsters have been released for the Earth category as of the time recording this analysis. And the thing about the Nemesis Monsters is that they have really crazy stats. And so I'm definitely going to be comparing Burotgor to all Earth monsters, but just know that the introduction of these Nemesis Monsters, it really skews the stats, in terms of how good the monster is perceived by their stats. And I'll get more into that when I talk about the stats. So for example, this monster has a power of 3,531, and currently this puts him in 7th place. In 7th place, tied with Osteoclast and Autumn's pets. Now the thing is, if it weren't for the Nemesis Monsters, he would actually be tied for 3rd place. You see what a big difference that makes? 7th place to 3rd place? It's just that Warthog the Sunbringer, the Mountain Splitter, and the Skull Crusher, they all have a base power of over 3,553. And then there's also Hydrotilla the Riftmaker, which is another Nemesis monster that has a power of 3,575. So if we were to actually exclude Nemesis monsters, the strongest Earth monster would be Killer Raptor with a base power of 3553, and next up would be Dead Wolf with a base power of 3542, and next up would be our Team Race monster. But unfortunately, since this analysis is after the release of the Nemesis monsters, Burotgor is unfortunately in 7th place, and you're going to see that's a similar situation with his life and his speed. So as for his life, he has 30,763, this actually puts him in 21st place, tied with monsters like the Warrior, Chin, and Bastet. And once again, the Nemesis monsters take 4 places above him, but even if we do exclude those Nemesis monsters, this still isn't really a high life for Earth monsters. Earth monsters just tend to be really tanky. And lastly, as for his speed, he has 3,399, which puts him in 12th place along with monsters like General Atum and Warthog the Skull Crusher. So he's actually tied with one of the Nemesis monsters. However, the other 3 Nemesis monsters, they are faster than him. Once again, all of his stats are completely displaced because of the Nemesis monsters, but what are you going to do? We got to compare all the monsters to their own elements. So the one thing you should take away when talking about his stats are just that he does have a really high power, and because of that he's going to be an attacker. And to make matters even better, he does come with the trait Hardened. All status effects have a 20% less accuracy against it, and in my opinion this is the the 3rd best trait next to having Bulwark or Tough. Because of course he's an Earth monster, so he should be worried about being stunned mostly, but you also have to remember that Baba Yaga exists, and Baba Yaga can AoE possess, and then in a war it's never just a one-on-one Earth against an Earth monster, it's going to be a variety of monsters. You're prone to being frozen, you're prone to being mega stun, so at least Hardened gives you some sort of chance to block against all of that. And like I usually say, when a monster is Hardened, this also makes him a pretty good monster to put on defense, because then the enemy can't rely on an AoE deny skill. Sure, 80% of the time it will land, but 20% of the time it won't land, and that's when your AI can take advantage of that. Anyways, moving on over to the ultimate attack, Bestial Whirlwind. Deals massive special damage to all enemies, applies quicksands to all enemies, applies bleeding to all enemies. His ultimate attack deals 65 special base damage to all of the enemy monsters. It applies quicksand and bleeding. Together, quicksand and bleeding, that's going to take away 25% of the enemy's life. So if you can deal 75% of damage using your ultimate attack using Bestial Whirlwind, quicksand and bleeding will do the rest. Currently in the game, no one is immune to quicksand, and as for bleeding, only the monsters that have the abomination trait are immune to bleeding. So it's truly a really powerful ultimate attack. And one thing I want to mention about this monster ultimate attack is the accuracy. It actually has a 200% accuracy. Normally ultimate attacks only have a 120% accuracy. So this means that even if you're blinded, heck, even if you're blinded or dazed, man, even if you're blinded, dazed, and sunburned, I'm pretty sure the skill would still land, right? You would still have an over 100% accuracy. So no matter what, this ultimate is guaranteed to hit, assuming this 200% accuracy is right. And I think the reason they give this monster's ultimate a 200% accuracy is because later on you're going to see this monster has the skill that is actually a self-blind. It's a self-blind with the triple damage. So if you were ever to get your ultimate, you can activate that skill, give yourself triple damage, you're blinded, but that doesn't matter because your ultimate is guaranteed to land. And so if you are to successfully give yourself triple damage, this ultimate attack would essentially be 195 special base damage to all of the enemy monsters, guaranteed not to miss, also applies quicksand and bleeding, not that you need it. So overall, this ultimate attack is pretty darn amazing. We're gonna skip skills group 1 because there's nothing worth mentioning here. And so then we can talk about skills group 2, Regenerating Fur. Deals heavy earth damage to one enemy, applies regeneration to attack, requires cooldown. This skill deals 55 earth-based damage to a single enemy, it costs 29 stamina with a 2-turn cooldown, and you get life regeneration. And the cool thing about Regenerating Fur is that you have 2 self skills, meaning if you were to start the game off with Regenerating Fur, this would probably work best against maybe a Thunder monster, because Regenerating Fur, with this monster's power with some strength runes, it's most likely going to one-hit the enemy Thunder monster. you have life regeneration. On the next turn, you get 20% of your life back. You can use your extra turn skill, get another 20% of your life back, and if needed to, if you're running the other extra turn skill, you could use it again and get 60% of your life back in one turn essentially. I mean, it's technically 3 turns because of the 2 extra turn skills, and it's a lot of stamina, but you can essentially recover up to 60% of your life in one turn. And even though you can pull off that amazing combo to pretty much get your life all the way to full, I wouldn't recommend it just because most of the time you don't need to do that. Most of the time, life regeneration doesn't come in handy too often unless it's a really long drawn out battle, unless you're going up against an opponent that has life runes that's really tanky and they're dealing damage against you. Overall though, most of the time I would say you don't need life regeneration, especially on an attacker. An attacker can probably one hit an enemy monster, possibly 2 enemy monsters, so there's really no need to do life regeneration. And again, the only time this guy would probably one hit the enemy monster would be against a thunder monster because you have that elemental advantage. Against another earth monster, this skill has no chance of killing them. Against most monsters, unless you give them some really high level runes, then that'd be your only chance. So with that being said, run this skill at your discretion, but I personally don't recommend it. And so the next skill up is Bestial Charged, deals heavy earth damage to one enemy, 50% chance of stunning target, gains an extra turn, requires cooldown. This skill deals 50 earth based damage to a single enemy, it only costs 25 stamina, has a 3 turn cooldown, 50% chance to stun. I don't like that, 50% chance, it probably won't land, but hey, it's better than nothing, right? This skill could have been an extra turn skill without the stun, and honestly I would still run it, it's a pretty good skill. So the fact that they added that 50% chance to stun, I consider that as icing on the cake like I usually say in my videos. It really didn't need that 50% chance to stun, because most of the time when I play the game I always say eliminate the main threat. So you're probably going to want to use Bestial Charge, deal that 50 earth based damage, then use another skill to eliminate the main threat. That's what you want to do. But the cool thing about this skill is that you do have the opportunity to use this skill against a monster. If it does stun it, you can move on and attack another monster because now you've immobilized the monster you originally targeted. So Bestial Charge in my opinion is a must-have skill. From all of his skill sets, definitely run this skill. And anyhow, moving on over to his final skill from skills group 2, Pure Rage. Deals massive special damage to one enemy, requires cooldown. Here we have a pretty vanilla skill, pretty straightforward, 70 special base damage to a single enemy, 27 stamina cost, 2 turn cooldown. And a skill like this, combined with strength runes, combined with this monster's power, this is guaranteed to one-hit most enemy monsters. Probably not an earth monster considering they're tanky, and many earth monsters do run a life rune on defense, but any other monster, you're pretty much guaranteed to one-hit them. And so with that being said, that goes back to what I said earlier. You can use Bestial Charge on an enemy monster. If you land that stun, you can not worry about that monster anymore and just 70 damage hit the other enemy monster that you find a threat. Or if you combine these two skills, it's 120 damage. 120 damage from these two skills. Or even if you attack an earth monster, this is 25, this is 70, that's 95 damage output. So he's a pretty powerful monster, and just wait until we get into skills group 3. So in skills group 3 we have Healing Flesh, deals heavy earth damage to one enemy, heals itself by 25%, requires cooldown. This skill deals 60 earth based damage to a single enemy, costs 29 stamina, 2 turn cooldown, and you heal yourself by 25%. In my opinion, Healing Flesh is better than giving yourself life regeneration, just because you get that immediate health. Keep in mind, with life regeneration, you need to wait until the following turn, which means you're prone to being hit by the enemy, you're prone to being immobilized, you're prone to all these things. But with Healing Flesh, it's bam, an immediate 25% life recovery. And so my personal preference is to run Healing Flesh over Regenerating Fur. However, if you see things differently, go ahead and run Regenerating Fur. And anyhow, let's move on to Bloodthirsty, a very controversial skill. Gains triple damage, applies blind to itself, gives 1 extra turn to itself, requires cooldown. So he has a self skill that gives himself triple damage for 2 turns. However, it also blinds himself for 2 turns, and he does get an immediate extra turn. Now the main downside to this skill is of course that you're going to blind yourself. If this would have been triple damage and an extra turn, it would have been way too overpowered. So the developers had to make it so you blind yourself. So is it worth running this skill? Well, let's take a look. 95% accuracy on all of his attacks because he doesn't have any AoEs. 95 minus 50, that's a 45% accuracy. Do you want to use a 45% accuracy skill? That's up to you. Most of the time that's going to be missing. 5% more often than it lands, it's going to miss. In my opinion, that's not worth using. Yeah, you get triple damage, yeah, you can make your weakest attack really powerful, but it's just not worth it because you're blinded for 2 turns. Of course, you can pair this up with a monster that gives them immunity to blind, however that requires a very specific setup, and in Team War you don't always get that option. And player versus player, go ahead, do what you want. But the way I make my analysis, you should really build all of your monsters for Team Wars, because that's where the more competitive side of Monster Legends is, as far as player versus player. And of course, you could always give yourself precision, increased accuracy, but the thing is, you get an immediate extra turn. So that first initial hit you do, it might miss, it might not miss, most of the time it will miss. You can't activate precision until the following turn. So overall, in my opinion, it's not worth running Bloodthirsty. That being said, however, it does have the combo with the ultimate attack. If you ever got your ultimate attack, you can use Bloodthirsty, then do the ultimate, and it's a guaranteed win. And on another note, it's also a self skill, meaning if you ever got possessed by like Baba Yaga, if you ever got possessed by a Hackster or a glitch doing corruption, if you got possessed by any monster, you would rid yourself of possession, and then you have a chance to eliminate an enemy monster. Like, you're guaranteed to kill an enemy monster if it lands. Sure, it may only be a 45% chance to knock out the enemy monster, but that's better than 0%, because if you get possessed and you're not running Bloodthirsty, well, the only thing you can do is recharge. And so recharge is a 0% chance of taking out the enemy monster, whereas with Bloodthirsty, at least it's a 45% chance. And actually, let's say you did get possessed, right? Let's say you're fighting Baba Yaga, she does AoE possession, your monster is possessed, you can use the skill Bloodthirsty, give yourself an extra turn, and then you can attack with Bestial Charge, which will essentially be 150 damage. And yeah, you have a 45% accuracy, but even if this skill misses, guess what? You get an extra turn, so you have yet another chance to eliminate an enemy monster. For example, you can use Pure Rage, which is essentially 210 damage output from one attack if it lands. Once again, 45% chance. And so if you were to do that combo of Bloodthirsty, Bestial Charge, and Pure Rage, overall I'd say you have like a 65% chance of landing a hit. Once again, if you were to get possessed, better than recharging, you have a 65% chance to land a hit. Heck, you might land both of your hits. You might land Bestial Charge and you might land Pure Rage, and then you've eliminated 2 enemy monsters if you got extremely lucky. If you were on the verge of losing, that's better than just recharging. So there's definitely arguments to running this skill, and there's definitely arguments to not running this skill. I mean, you could run the skill and just not use it unless you really needed to. Like I mentioned, if you're possessed, it's really up to you. I can't really say 100% sure whether or not what you should or shouldn't do. So yeah, you're ultimately going to have to make that decision for yourself. And then lastly, we have Bestial Hits, deals insane special damage to one enemy, 50% chance of stunning target, requires cooldown. So here we have what is essentially an upgraded version of the skill from skill group 2, deals 75 special base damage to single enemy, 25 stamina cost, 3 turn cooldown, and still a 50% chance to stun. I wish they would have raised it to 100% chance to stun, but at the same time, 75 damage, guaranteed to kill an enemy monster, with the exception of course of a tanky monster with a life rune. If you combine Bestial Hits with Bestial Charge, that is 125 damage output, or against an earth monster, that's 100 damage output. And so anyhow, my recommended skill set for this monster would be Bestial Charge, Pure Rage, Healing Flesh, and Bestial Hits. And if you want to be a little more risky, if you think luck is on your side, if you want to have that possibility of using Bloodthirsty with your ultimate attack, then my secondary recommended skill set would be Bestial Charge, Pure Rage, Bloodthirsty, and Bestial Hits. And even with that skill set, you have the option of removing either Bestial Hits or Pure Rage for Healing Flesh, just so you can have that earth-based attack and that elemental advantage over thunder monsters like Voltic and Xyla, and also so you could heal yourself if you ever needed to. Because it only has a 2 turn cooldown, if you started the game off with Healing Flesh and took out like an enemy thunder monster, and say you took damage, you could do Bloodthirsty, Bestial Charge, regardless of whether or not you kill an enemy monster. Thanks to Bloodthirsty and Bestial Charge, 2 turns have passed and you'd be able to use Healing Flesh again to recover your life. So it could definitely also work with Healing Flesh. It's just up to you whether you want Pure Rage or whether you want Bestial Hits, and I imagine most people would take Bestial Hits just because of that 5 more extra damage. But before I lose track of what I was going to say, the cool thing about this monster is the extremely low stamina cost. If you were to start the game off with Bestial Hits, that's only 25 stamina. On the next turn, if you use Bloodthirsty, that's 28, for a grand total of 53 stamina, and meanwhile Bestial Hits has a 3 turn cooldown. So when you use Bloodthirsty, that goes down to a 2 turn cooldown. When you use Bestial Charge, that's only 25 stamina, for a grand total of 78 stamina, and Bestial Hits would be at a 1 turn cooldown. And then you end off with Pure Rage, that's only 27 stamina, for a grand total of 105 stamina, and the cooldown on Bestial Hits would be gone, which means on your next turn, if there is a next turn, assuming you missed all of your other attacks, you would be able to use Bestial Hits again, 25 stamina, and then you would be level 10 stamina, so you can do a full cycle with this monster, so that's pretty darn good. So you have to, at the end of the day, decide on your skill set. Regardless of what skill set you choose, the runes for this monster should be 2 strength runes and a speed rune, or a team speed. And so yeah, that's going to be it for the analysis on Burotgor. Let me know what you guys thought about the analysis. Let me know what you guys think about Bloodthirsty. Is the way I explained it, does that make it more usable? Does that make it more feasible? In the right hands, under certain situations, it can potentially be really good. But again, it's up to you as a player to decide whether or not you want to run it, whether it's worth using, whether it's not using, whether it's a really good skill, whether it's trash. Let me know in the comments below. Have you guys thought of a way to utilize it even better than what I mentioned? If you have, please let me know in the comments below. With that being said, I'm RRabbits, and like always, remember to dream big and pursue your passions.